Welcome back. Astrid, there are some questions.
Yes, we have questions. The first question is, from that inseparable connection, can you then say that whatever happens in the world, we are also karmically connected to it?
Yeah, if you know something, if you know that something is happening, if you see it or perceive it, then there is a bond. Because if you didn't see it, okay, there is no karmic relation. But we know, especially nowadays with all the modern communications, that what is happening in let's say in Japan or in Brazil, we know it. So we have a bond with it. So we are responsible for what is happening there. And of course, our responsibility is more tense with the persons who live near us. But if we know, for instance, what is happening in, let's say, in the Middle East now, then we should accept the fact that we also have a bond with that, and that means that we, in our mind, in our thinking, would be trying to solve those problems in the world. So if we see something happening and we don't like it, then we have to create a characteristic within ourselves which is the opposite of the violence, for instance, that we see now in the Middle East. So that we have to be peaceful. And that will, of course, not solve the problem immediately, but it will help. It is a contribution to solve the problem, a problem of war. If you are peaceful yourself and you don't manifest all the characteristics which are the cause for war, but you have all the opposite characteristics, you are a force for peace in the world. So yes, we are connected with everything and everybody in the world, and the connection is tenser, is more stronger if we are living nearer that situation or the people, but nevertheless also from people who live far away from us, and we know that they exist, we have a bond, so there is a kind of responsibility. Karma is the doctrine of responsibility.
But then could you also say that because of internet and media, that this responsibility has increased over the last 10, 20 years?
For sure. That's, you know, if I have a neighbor and my neighbor is ill, but I don't know it, and there is no chance for me to know it, then you can, I'm not responsible because I simply don't know it. But nowadays, with all those communications, the internet, television, etc., we know what's happening in the world. And we can see the links between all those countries and faraway countries. We simply can see it. So we are responsible. We are a unity. All human beings are interconnected. You know, they come from the same source. We're all part of that web of destiny. So.
Yeah, so there's another question on this web of destiny. Is there a roadmap, a scheme and manual in the Theosophia to understand this web of destiny?
Yeah, there is. In fact, all the Theosophical doctrines are the roadmap. Yeah, and the first thing that you have to do is try to make a mental picture of that web of destiny. And that means you have to make a mental picture of the unity of humanity, but in fact unity of all beings. If you perceive that brotherhood is a fact in nature, and that we are brothers one to another because we are all part of the same web of destiny, we all arise from the same source, the farthest monad in our hierarchy. If you perceive that, and you can perceive it by trying to make that mental picture of unity, yeah, then of course that is the best roadmap, because then you will more easily understand the other doctrines like reincarnation and karma and the hierarchical structure and self-becoming and evolution. All those doctrines, you know, cannot be understood without the overarching idea of unity, of consciousness, but consciousness as a unity of which we are all a part. Every being is a part of that great web of destiny. Being in itself a web of destiny, but also connected, interconnected with all those trillions of other webs of destiny. And that's a very beautiful picture, mind picture. If you can try to see that unity, then I can assure you that all your thoughts and all your actions will be different. Yeah, because the opposite is the feeling of separateness. Then you think you have nothing to do with your neighbor. And there is war in the Middle East, but that's not my piece of cake. Because, no, but we are interconnected. We are interconnected. We form that unity. And that's the best roadmap, I think.
Yeah, when you speak about a web of destiny, I think it's tricky because automatically you think of like a web or a spider web or something that is connected, but it's not only on a physical plane. It's,
No.
can you say that it also is on the web of destiny is on different spheres or
Yes,
different
because
planes?
there are threads horizontal and vertical. So we are connected with the monads who are above us, more evolved. Let's call them the gods of the angels, give them a name, the Dianchoans we say. But also we are connected with the animals, the monads below us. And we are of course connected with other human beings. There are all kind of threads, all kind of connections, all in all realms of nature, all the kingdoms of nature are connected to each other. There's a very close connection between the animals and humans. We don't realize it, but we are in fact the gods, the farther evolved beings. We are the gods in relation to the animals. And above us, and above, of course, not as literally, but more evolved than we are, there are beings which we may call the Dianchoans or the angels, or the name is not important, but they are farther evolved than we, and there is a connection between us, human beings, and those gods. And if we tune ourselves, our consciousness in the divine program, so to speak, like a radio, you put on another station, then there is then you realize the connection between the more divine realms of nature and the realm of nature of humanity. So that connection is there, but we don't realize it. Or we don't realize it enough, or just a few moments. But there is a relation, all kinds of relations.
So if we can get sick with viruses, can we make the beings in the higher realm also sick? If that connection is there.
Well, if we live in harmony with nature, and that means we are not selfish, but we try to work on with nature, there will be no disease. And we will cooperate with viruses, and we will cooperate with animals, and we will cooperate with bacteria. But the moment we put ourselves, so to speak, outside of nature, and we think we are not connected with the nature, and that means selfishness and self-interest and not caring about others, all those things. Well, then we create in ourselves disbalance. Disbalance is the word? Yeah?
Disbalance.
Disbalance. And then you open yourself for diseases, etc. But if you cooperate with nature, of course you can live with all those beings.
There is a question also about our relationship with animals. And it says the mega slaughterhouses and other suffering that humans inflict on animals. What kind of karma do the animals have?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, and I know that the person who asked the question asked the same question last Wednesday in the Dutch lecture, and I can promise that we have talked about it. The speakers of these lectures, and we will get a very good answer because it's very difficult. You have to go just a few clues. It's not a complete answer, but you have to go back many reincarnations, and in fact you have to go back to another big Manvantara, as we call it. And Manvantara is the alive of a planet. So in an other Manvantara, the human beings were not human beings, that they were the most advanced animals, because everything is growing, is growing, is growing. And from that far away past, there was already a relationship between humans and what is now animals. So the relationship is there. They belong to us, and there are causes from the far past, but I want to express very firmly that it is especially the human responsibility that those animals suffer now, because we have self-consciousness, we are able to make choices, and we have chosen in general in our society that we will treat animals the way we do now. All of course because of greed, all of course because of selfishness, all of course because we want to have cheap meat to eat. You know, that's why we torture those brothers, because in fact the animals are also brothers of us, yeah, and in another class. They're not advanced as we are, but they are also a part of that living web of destiny. So the responsibility is for 100% with the human being. But there is a relationship from a far past between what is now a human being and what is now an animal. That is not a complete answer, I know it, but I can promise the person who asked the questions that one way or another, I think maybe in our magazine Lucifer we will answer that question at length, because you have to involve many difficult, complicated Theosophical teachings.
Okay. Do we have time for more questions?
Well,
yeah. What is the relation between the consciousness and the self?
The self with a capital?
Yes, with a capital.
Well, the self, we call it Atman. Atman, Sanskrit word, in fact a word that cannot be translated, but if you want to translate it, you can say self. The self is in fact the self in everything in the cosmos, in the hierarchy. It's the primordial point, it's the point from which emanates the whole hierarchy, the thousands, the millions, the trillions of beings. So the self in me is the self, the same as the self in you. It's Atman. There is no such thing as my Atman and your Atman. Atman, or the self, is the divine God, the most divine aspect of a hierarchy. It's not an endpoint, for sure not, because in the boundlessness there are no endpoints. But between the borders of our hierarchy, let's say, the borders of hierarchy, it's the most evolved point, the most evolved monad, the monas monadum, as Pythagoras called it. Yes, it's the highest one. So it's myself, but it's also yourself. And in the beautiful Indian philosophy, they also speak of Param Atman. So just to express that there is no end point. Even as for us, Atman is the most advanced point, the most advanced monad. Yeah, there is still more, there is boundlessness. So the self is the highest point, the highest monad, the highest aspect in every living being in this hierarchy.
Okay. Last question for now. Etty Hillesum's great ideal was banishing hatred from ourselves and thus from the world. Is that a task we can fulfill to strengthen peace in the whole?
Yeah, but I would prefer to formulate it a little bit different, not to banish hate, because then you are focused on hate, but it's better, I think, to focus on love and impersonal love or superpersonal love. Yeah, and superpersonal love is, you know, if you have that image of unity, automatically, yeah, as a fact in nature, you will love your neighbor and love in a super personal way. So yes, for sure, if we could manage to do that, compassion, love, yeah, love is the cement of the universe, the Peruka says. Yeah, it's beautiful, it binds all things together. Of course, that is something we really have to do, need to do, and it's very inspiring to do, and it makes your own life much happier, not only happier, but more, it gives more sense to your life. So please do it. You cannot try to do it enough.
Okay, that was it
Yeah?
for now.
Okay. Well, karma always asks for a lot of questions, so it's very good to think about it. Well, before the break, we tried to paint that grand and universal picture of karma. There's a kind of risk if you do it. The risk is that it's so universal and so wide-ranging that people drop out. But nevertheless, we thought it best to start with that universal picture, following the Platonic way of teaching, or the esoteric way of teaching, in which you always start with the most universal, and then descend to the smaller, to the details, that which is perhaps a little bit more easy to understand. We are going to try to do that now, but we hope that in the background of your thinking, that universal image of that gigantic web of destiny remains. Well, what is karma? We described it above as the operation and interaction between all centers of consciousness of the cosmos, in which each act is a cause leading to an effect consistent with the nature of that act. The word karma is derived from the Sanskrit root kri, which means acting. So karma literally means action or working. And the idea behind this is that every act is a cause that leads to an effect, and hence we also speak of the law of cause and effect. Is this an unknown law in our world? Not at all. All of science, especially physics and chemistry, is based on it. There would be chaos, completely disorder, if there were no cause and effect. If this law were not there, sometimes something would fall up, sometimes something would fall down, sometimes the night would last 12 hours, sometimes half a year or 4 years. And if you put two substances together in the same conditions, then they would not react to each other according a certain pattern, etc., etc. So, in the physical world, everybody accepts the law, of course, and effect. But does cause and effect exist only in the physical world? Stiff-necked materialists will say yes, but if they would look a little bit more closely at themselves, not in the physical mirror, but in the mirror of their consciousness, they would know that man is much more than just his body. His feelings, his desires, his intellect, intuition, his spiritual aspects. Man is a composite being. Would the law of cause and effect only be valid in the physical world? That doesn't seem logical. And we, therefore, assert that karma applies to all parts of the cosmos, including all aspects in our consciousness. And therefore, there's not only physical karma, but also psychic, mental, spiritual, divine karma. All these different aspects in our consciousness belong together, rise from each other, and if it's good, they also work together. The relatively highest or most developed part of man, the relative highest monad in the stream of consciousness that man is, the inner God, is the source, the origin of his being. And from that source, from the inner God, flows a stream of consciousness, in which are all those powers, all those properties and qualities. In it is inspiration, will, intuition, mind, desire, feelings. Man can identify with all those aspects, think and act from those aspects of consciousness, and reap consequences in accordance with those characteristics. The intellectual will sow and reap in the intellectual field, while the true idealist sows and reaps causes more in the spiritual field. And of course, we humans are often complex beings. Our character is often full of contradictions. Sometimes we are very intellectual, but at other times we completely surrender to emotion. We sow the karmic seed on all layers of our consciousness, and therefore also reap on different aspects, from the physical to the spiritual divine. What is further very important is that from that relatively highest aspect in our consciousness also flows the will, the free will. Consciousness and will are closely related. So all our actions are not the result of a blind outside force. No, they come from within, from our own free will, emanating from the divine part of our consciousness. So without that will, karma would not exist. The will to move, to grow, to act and react is an inherent force in every being. However, we are limited in our actions. Perhaps we want to leave the earth or fathom the string theory, to understand the string theory, that very difficult theory, but in many cases we will not succeed. The will, in other words, is relatively free. There is an active will to live though, to be born again and again, and just as every being thirsts for an existence in this outer world, so there is a will for growth. In beings lower than man, that will is almost automatic, instinctive. But even the blade of grass squeezing its way out through the asphalt has a will to live and to experience and to grow. It is the will, this thirst for manifestation, flowing from the monad that we are, so from the essence of what we are, that determines whether we do something or not. Why do you wake up every morning? Is there a force outside of you that wakes you up? I do not mean the alarm clock, because even if you have not set the alarm clock, you wake up, maybe an hour later, but you do wake up. And also from the great sleep, death, you wake up once again. We are born again. By whom? Or what? Does that happen? By a God? No, our own will to live. And similarly, every act of ours is a consequence, is an expression of will. So karma has everything to do with free will. Now, as a being has a greater range of consciousness, that is, when it is more highly developed, its portion of free will also increases. And because man's faculties are limited and man's knowledge is limited, after all, we are not all knowing, the free will is also limited. We have to do it with the faculties we have. So that means that if we have to make a choice, if we have to perform an action, we cannot dispose of the faculties of a God. We can only use those faculties and that knowledge that we, during the boundless evolution that lies behind us, have managed to accumulate. That's all we have. It's actually very simple. If you go to Spain and your Spanish is not perfect, you have to use the imperfect Spanish if you want to communicate with the people there. Compared to a Spaniard, you are very limited in that respect. If you want to play the piano, but you cannot read notes, you are in some sense limited compared to someone who can. And therefore, you are also limited in your abilities. If somebody gives you a score and says play it, you can't, because you cannot read music. And that doesn't mean that you have no musical talent. Maybe you are very talented, but you cannot read from sheet music. And so you are limited in that respect. So if I give you 3 scores and say pick up and choose what you like, choose the most beautiful you like, you can't, because you cannot read music. In this way, your free will is also limited. Your radius of action, if you can express it that way, is more limited, at least in this respect, than somebody who can read music. And of course, you can make the decision to learn to read music, and if you are motivated, you will learn it quickly. And if you have learned it, your possibilities are greater. Your freedom of choice is also greater. Your free will is increased. And therefore, free will is greater as knowledge increases. In other words, the free will is basically the amount of spiritual energy, the spiritual vitality, and the amount of intellect that the being, a monad, has managed to develop. As a being rises on the ladder of life and progresses in its evolution and has developed more of its consciousness, the greater is his portion of free will. Viewed in this light, we can, from our human point of view, say that animals don't have free will and plants don't have it at all. But that's only considered from the human point of view. We, human beings, are thinkers and have self-consciousness. Animals don't, and therefore they have no moral responsibility. But that doesn't mean that within the reach of their animal consciousness they don't have freedom of choice? Of course they have. But compared to human free will, it is much, much more limited. If animals had no free choice at all, every dog, for example, would be the same. So we see that the more developed an animal is, mammals, for example, and particularly domestic animals, that their character is also more pronounced. One dog is not the other, but I've never been able to detect a difference between one worm and another, except maybe that one is a little bit bigger than the other. Still, there will have to be inner differences as well. There are two different monads, both of which have their own specific character. And those characters, of course, are very similar, but there must be a difference in them, arising from their very, very limited, but their free will, which within the margins of worm consciousness may differ from other worms. A worm's choices, so to speak, will therefore differ only slightly from other worms. So the scope of free will depends on a being's range of consciousness. Moreover, if you as a human being constantly make certain choices, the tendency arises to make the same choice over and over again. Any addiction is an example of this. A person who is addicted to cigarettes or candy or whatever, every time he picks up a cigarette or a candy, makes a choice to smoke or to eat candy. But that choice becomes such an ingrained habit in his mind that at some point it becomes automatic. So in fact, such a person limits his free will. And if he later becomes ill because of his addiction, can we speak of doom or blind fate? No. Ultimately, that sickness can be traced back to its own free will, by which he made or she made the choice to smoke or to snack. Now you will say, but there are people who don't smoke and don't snack who still get lung cancer or obesity. And that is certainly the case. And that means, first of all, that we should never, but never, never condemn or judge people. We simply don't have the knowledge for that. But then how it is that healthy living people can still get sick? Well, we must remind you again that karma must always be studied in conjunction with the law of cyclicity. And in the case of humans, that means without reincarnation, karma cannot be understood. Indeed, not every consequence in our life can be traced to this life. The circumstances in which we are born, our character, more about that in the third part of the talk, the people we meet, etc., etc. It is all a result of causes we created in previous lives. If you don't know the causes, we used to talk about coincidence or the inscrutable ways of God, or we call it blind faith. It would be better if we admitted our ignorance instead of cloaking it in meaningless words. In this way, every act we perform now does not necessarily lead to a short-term consequence. We all know that. We see, for example, that people can perform cruel acts and receive no response to them. And people who perform loving acts are pushed deeper and deeper into misery. Do their acts have no consequence? Certainly they have, but that can sometimes take some time. I just gave the example of someone who smokes a lot and doesn't get a disease. But it can also be, for example, that he smokes until he's 30 and then stops smoking. And at the age of 60, and that is 30 years after he quit smoking, he gets trouble with his lungs. If you had known him only in those last 30 years, you would say that man or that woman doesn't smoke and he still gets lung cancer. But the consequence would possibly not manifest at all in this life, but in the next life. And in that next life we don't see any cause, and out of ignorance we then use words like coincidence. Think of an act as a seed. Sometimes the seed comes up quickly. You saw it in spring, and in the summer it already gives flowers. But we also know that there are seeds that lie in the ground for several years and waiting until conditions are right to germinate. Exactly so it is with thought seed. The karma lies in the storehouse of our consciousness, so to speak, waiting for the right conditions to germinate, and that may be in the next life or perhaps after a few lives. Every act is weaving further on our web of destiny. That thread with which we weave is endless. It loses itself in the past. We weave it now in this present life, and what we weave is our future. This image of karma was beloved by the ancient Greeks, who spoke of the three divinities, the three fates, the three Moirai. I.S.I.S, called the allotter, which presided over the past. That means for each individual human being, all that he had thought, all that he had desired, all that he had done in the past. I.S.I.S itself means to come about. The second goddess, the second Moirai, the Greek called Clotho, which is derived from a Greek word meaning spinning. She symbolized man as he is now, man in the present, weaving at the loom of his destiny. It implies the destiny that an individual human being is spinning for himself. He weaves the web of his future destiny. The third sister or goddess was Atropos, a word that means which cannot be avoided or turned aside. It's the future destiny. The destiny is derived from the present spinning, and that present spinning takes place according to the plotted lines of the past, the plotted lines of thought and action of all that had already been thought and done. Man is what he is because of the past, and in accordance with the past, he spins on the spinning wheel of destiny and weaves his future destiny, that which can never be cast aside. Does Clotho force humans to weave a certain pattern? Does the deity force them to weave fast or slow, how to weave, what to weave? No, we do that ourselves. Human beings decide for themselves. They decide on the basis of their own free will. Thus one weaves its own fate, its own destiny, that what one will reap in the future. This is the chain of causation and effect. This is the path we have walked in the past and we will walk in the future. So the future is not the great unknown. The future is not waiting for us. The future does not come from before to meet us, but comes steaming up from behind over our heads. Well, there is again a break of 3 minutes. Ask your questions using the chat function of the email, and then we see each other in 3 minutes. Welcome back, Astrid.
Yes, we have some questions. The first question is, if karma is destiny, what is destiny then? Is karma some kind of fatalism?
No. Fatalism, no. Because, as I try to explain, we have free will. Although our will is limited, there is nobody to force us to do something. Karma is ourselves. You are your own karma. I am my karma. Everything is its karma, its causes and affected. And the entity, the being, by acting, and every being acts, is creating karma. So you create yourself, you create your own karma. And of course you do that in interaction with all other human beings or all other entities, but you are your karma. And nobody forces you to act in a certain way, to think in a certain way. There's no fatalism, not at all. But if you have created something, what's done cannot be undone. Yeah, Shakespeare says that, yeah?
So that's not something we can change anymore.
No.
We can only change what will come in the future.
No, what's done cannot be undone. There is not something as, I forgive you your mistakes. No, that's impossible. Yeah? But the way you react on the circumstances is a matter of free will. So let's give you a very simple example. You are not very nice to your neighbor. You accused him of something he didn't do. It was really a mistake. Really something that was not very nice. Well, you did it. You cannot undo it. It's done, so you have to reap the consequences. Okay, the consequences will come. How do you react? Yeah? Do you feel pity with yourself because somebody is not nice to you? Or do you say, oh, poor me, and everybody makes mistakes, why can I make mistakes? Or do you say, no, it was my fault, I will be a man or be a woman, I will be a human being and I will bear it without complaining. Yeah? And then you grow in consciousness. So the way you react on the circumstances you live is purely free will. But as I said, if you are in the lecture, if you are always reacting in the same way, yeah, I gave the example of smoking. You create a habit. Your thoughts will ingrain in your mind, so it is almost automatically that you react on the same way. But it is not necessary, but you can change. Yeah? You can always change. In the third part of this talk I will tell more about that, I think.
So you can change, but is karma a requirement for human beings to learn?
Well, they say, and I agree with it, that karma is your best teacher. Because karma gives you the lessons, especially for you, because you are confronted with the circumstances, with the people you have to deal with. Everything in your life is a result of your own acting and thinking. So it's the best lessons. You will never get a lesson that not belongs to you, because you didn't create the cause. So karma is your best teacher. That doesn't mean that you have to make mistakes. There are some people who think that you should make mistakes to learn. No, that's not the Theosophical idea. Because in our mind we can create an ideal world, and we can create a mental picture of how a human being should be, should think. Yeah, we talked about impersonal love and compassion. You can, for yourself, you can make that idea, that ideal, how to live, how to react on others, etc. So you need not to make mistakes to grow. But if you have made a mistake, and if you are confronted with the reactions of, something you did wrong, okay, accept it and learn from it.
The last question is, the time that the earth exists has an end, which we call manvantara, then the great sleep, the kalpa, starts. Does this event also have to do with karma?
Yes. Everything has to do with karma. Yeah, because everything has a cause and will lead to a consequence. There's just one thing, the principle, the immutable, boundless principle, karana, Sanskrit, the causeless cause, unknowable, that is beyond karma. But even the farthest god, the most evolved being you can imagine, is creating karma. Because every living being acts, and by acting it creates karma. So the entity, the spirit of planet Earth, let's call it the spirit, the living being, planet Earth, has his periods of life and death as well. And after his life period, we call it the manvantara, he will rest. Just like a human being has his period of activity and of passivity, then he rests. Now that's the same with the earth. And then the earth, the living being, the hierarchy which we call the earth, it will manifest itself again with all those beings that belong to it, all those gods and humans and animals and plants and minerals, etc. So it's all karma.
Okay, that was it for now.
That was it. Okay, the last part. From what we have said before, it may be clear that we are part of the cosmos. Yeah, we are part of that universe.